This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
At the very beginning of today's proceedings, Papa Vajra reminded us that we are celebrating an anniversary. This is FWBO Day, and we are remembering the foundation of the FWBO 34 years ago. Now, I'm not going to start reminiscing. I'm not going to start reminiscing about that little basement, it was a basement, in Monmouth Street, where exactly 34 years ago the FWBO was founded. I have reminisced about that little basement on quite a number of occasions, and I remember that little basement very fondly. And looking around the hall at this moment, I can't help just remembering that on that occasion there was just myself and I think some 20 other people. And that was the point at which the FWBO, which we're celebrating today, began. Of course, we have grown a little since then, and I trust that we shall continue growing. But so I'm not going to look back really to 1967 and not going to reminisce about that. I do want to look back just a little way. I want to look back some 15 or 16 years. I want to look back to 1985. Because in 1985 there occurred a quite important event. I might even describe it as a momentous event. And that was none other than the publication of the first edition of Subhuti's book, The Buddhist Vision. Now, the Buddhist Vision was not Subhuti's first book, I believe it was his second, and it was not to be his last. But it does seem that of all his writings, certainly all his writings published in book form, that the Buddhist Vision has been by far the most popular. It wasn't very many years after that first publication that a second edition was called for, and it has been translated and published not only in English but in German and in Spanish, and there may even be other translations that I'm not aware of, which means that there are perhaps some tens of thousands of copies of this book now in circulation. So today, as part of today's proceedings, as part of today's celebrations, there is another important event, which is that I'm launching this third revised new edition of Subhuti's The Buddhist Vision, with this beautiful new cover. I must say that I've always liked the title of Subhuti's book. I've always liked this title, The Buddhist Vision. I know from my own experience it's not very easy to find a really good title for a book, one that is appropriate to the content and which is also a bit catchy, which draws the readers or the prospective purchasers' attention. But I think in this case, Subhuti has found, or perhaps his publisher found, a really good title, The Buddhist Vision. Because I remember, well, this is to reminisce just a little bit after all, that when I first became involved with Buddhism, which was much more than 34 years ago, in Buddhist circles, in the very tiny Buddhist circles that we had then, well, there was actually only one, and it was very small, there was quite a bit of discussion as to what Buddhism was. And the crux of the discussion was, very often, whether Buddhism was a religion. And that was in doubt, because it didn't have a personal God. Or whether Buddhism was a philosophy. Was it a religion? Was it a philosophy? Some people thought that yes, Buddhism is a religion. Others thought definitely no, it isn't. It's a philosophy. Sometimes they said just a philosophy. And later, of course, we had a number of people coming along who thought that Buddhism was scientific. Oh, Subhuti dealt with that one in one of his minor works. But to my mind, it's not very appropriate, really, to speak of Buddhism as a religion. I've done that myself. Nor is it really very appropriate to speak of it as a philosophy. I've done that myself too. But I think it's much, much better to speak of Buddhism as being a vision. And therefore we have the Buddhist vision. Buddhism, we may say, is a vision of what a human being is capable of becoming, both singly and not collectively, but within the context of a community, a spiritual community. And perhaps it's rather significant that, in a way, Buddhism itself began with, or from, a vision, almost literally a vision of the Buddha himself, because we're told that shortly after his enlightenment, well, so to speak, the mood of his enlightenment was still upon him, and he was thinking of whether to teach, whether to communicate the truth he had discovered or not. He looked out into the world, and he saw, as it were, humanity, the human race, before him, just like a bed of lotus flowers. And he saw that some were deep in the mud, others were half emerged, and others were standing almost clear of the water. And he saw that human beings had this potentiality, this capability for growth and development. And it was this which he saw and which impelled him out of compassion to teach the Dharma that he had discovered so that beings might grow. So I think it's very appropriate, most appropriate, to think of Buddhism not as a religion, not as a philosophy, but as a vision. And therefore I'm very happy that Subhuti, all those years ago, decided that his book, which we're launching again now, should be called The Buddhist Vision. Without vision, our lives are miserable. We might even say, without vision, our lives are not really worth living at all. I believe it's because you were looking for the vision that many of you originally came into contact with the FWBO. I don't often read the Bible, but there are certain sayings of the Bible which are quite favourites of mine. And I think I may say that my favourite saying from the Bible is, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." For those who want the reference, that is Proverbs 29, verse 18. Where there is no vision, the people perish. And I think no truer word was spoken in the Bible by anybody. So we have to guard that vision, we have to cherish that vision. So let me give you another biblical quotation. After all, it's Sunday and it's Easter too. So this quotation reads like this: "Write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it." I'll read that again. "Write the vision and make it plain upon tables." Tables here meaning a flat writing surface, not tables from which you eat. "Make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it." Again, the reference is Habakkuk 2:2. Habakkuk being one of the so-called minor prophets. So this is just what Subhuti has done. He's shared in the Buddhist vision, the Buddha's own vision, and he has made it plain upon tables in the form of this book, the Buddhist vision. He's written it down, and I believe he's made it very plain indeed, so that he may run that readeth it. So what are we to make of that? That he may run that readeth it. Well, you read the book and then you run. You run in the direction of the vision, obviously. You go for refuge, eventually. So, that he may run that readeth it. Not only that, that's not the only way in which you may run. But after seeing the book, seeing the Buddhist vision, you may run and buy it. And you'll get it very cheap. I've been reminded I mustn't miss this bit out. It's only $11.99. And I believe that once you've purchased your copy, Subhuti will be sitting somewhere in a quiet corner and will be very happy to sign it for you if you so wish.
I'd forgotten what a good salesman Bhante was. He was very, very good with jumble. Well, this is not an exercise in mutual congratulation, but I am going to launch a book by Bhante. Well, not a book by Bhante, but a book that Bhante has translated. I'm going to be launching the Dhammapada, The Way of Truth, which is Bhante's translation of that very, very important Pali text. Bhante has spoken of himself as a translator, but he's used that in a metaphorical sense. He's talked of himself as an elucidator of the Dharma, bringing the Dhamma from the dark into the light. And in that sense, he's seen himself as a translator. But in this case, he's literally a translator. And he's devoted himself over many years to the translation of this very, very important text, which is, in fact, one of the most important and basic texts in Buddhism. Versions of it are found in all different schools. And as Bhante says, it contains verses embodying ethical and spiritual precepts grouped more or less according to subject. It's a bit like the book of Proverbs in a way. So it's a set of aphorisms that embody the pith of the Dhamma. And it does so in a very, very powerful and compelling way. And really it's an essential collection for any Buddhist. It contains, in Bhante's words, as much of the Buddha's teaching as most of us really need to know to progress towards enlightenment. Well, you couldn't have a more selling statement than that. This contains as much of the Buddha's teaching as most of us really need to know to progress towards enlightenment. We like to have so many books. We like to pile up Buddhist books, most of which, of course, we don't read, or if we do read them, we don't make so much use of them. But here is a collection of sayings of the Buddha, translated by Bhante, which can take us all the way to enlightenment, and which can last us a lifetime. It contains 423 verses, arranged in 26 chapters, and one of the greatest spiritual classics of mankind by any standards. And it's really a lifetime's source of study, reflection, meditation, and realization. You could take any one of these aphorisms and meditate upon it, and many of them would lead one to the deepest realization. So there have been many translations of the Dhammapada before into English, indeed into other languages too. Apparently there are more than 30 translations of the Dhammapada in English. I don't know whether they're available, but they have been done. And there are quite a number on sale at the moment. But nonetheless, we're very fortunate indeed to have a version by our own teacher, Urgyen Sangharakshita. As he says himself, first of all, it's worth having more translations because no single translation can fully exhaust the meaning of the original. It's such a powerful work, so compact, and the original language is so terse and so pithy, so multivalent, that each translation will bring out new aspects of the text. But this translation has special merits. First of all, of course, from our point of view, it's by our own teacher. And there's a sense in which we're being personally addressed by the translation. After all, his translation comes out not just of his knowledge of Pali, his understanding of the Dhamma, but his knowledge of individuals, of the people he's addressing. And those people are, in the first place, ourselves. So the translation is, in many ways, addressed to us individually and personally. But it's also significant, this translation, because the Dhammapada has been especially important to Bhante for many years. Many years ago, when he was wandering in India, he learnt it by heart in Pali. And at that stage, he didn't understand Pali. He had an English translation, but he couldn't work out the literal meaning of the Pali. But he felt so strongly moved by the text that he learnt it by heart. And he can still recite pretty much at will from the Dhammapada. Occasionally, over coffee at Majjhimaloka, he'll come out with a verse from the Dhammapada. First of all in Pali, and then in English, with often a commentary. So the Dhammapada has been with him for many, many years, and he does know it very, very well indeed. He's studied and reflected on it again and again and again. And he's taught from the Dhammapada in India and here in Britain. So he has great feeling and understanding. And what we've got here is a translation not by a competent philologist, although he is a competent philologist, not merely by a competent philologist, but by somebody who really cares about the text and feels very strongly for it. But finally, it has to be said, it's a very good translation. It's very clear, even pellucid. And it's very pithy, compact and concise. And the meaning is absolutely plain, so that it burns into you instantly. Sometimes with versions of the Dhammapada, when you read them, you have to spend some time working out exactly what the verse is saying at, what it's getting at. But in Bhante's translation, on the whole, where it's possible to be so, the meaning is absolutely plain, and it sort of burns into you. And it's translated in a very elegant style. Each aphorism is beautifully crafted. Each verse or group of verses very complete from a stylistic point of view, both in meaning and in expression. But I thought that to introduce the work to you, I should just read you a few selected verses. They're just ones that caught my eye or ones that are particular favourites of mine. I'm going to start with what probably the most famous of the verses from the Dhammapada, the first two verses. from the section of pairs. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows, even as the cartwheel follows the hoof of the ox drawing the cart. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. So clear, so simple, so direct. So next, one that's again very simple but very, very far-reaching. If by renouncing a limited happiness, one would see an abundant happiness, let the spiritually mature person, having regard to the abundant happiness, sacrifice the limited happiness. This makes sense. Now, just to show you that the Dhammapada can bite, just in case you think it's all nice, easy, general aphorisms. Cut down the whole forest, not just one tree. From the forest arises fear. Cutting down both wood and brushwood. Be out of the wood, almsman. To the extent that one has not cut down that last little bit of this brushwood, of the craving of man for woman, to that extent his mind will be fettered as the sucking calf to its mother. Cut off your sticky affection, as one plucks with one's hand the white autumnal lotus. Develop the way of peace, the nirvana taught by the happy one. So it's not always comfortable, and of course one can change round it where necessary. Man for woman, woman for man, man for man, woman for woman. There's no respecter of persons, the Dhammapada. But the Dhammapada can bite, and there's plenty more bite in it. But there's a very important one to us in the FWBO. In a way, it's a foundational text for us. Many people, out of fear, flee for refuge to sacred hills, woods, groves, trees, and shrines. In reality, this is not a safe refuge. In reality, this is not the best refuge. Fleeing to such a refuge, one is not released from all suffering. He who goes for refuge to the enlightened one, to the truth, and to the spiritual community, and who sees with perfect wisdom the four Aryan truths, namely suffering, the origin of suffering, the passing beyond suffering, and the Aryan Eightfold Way leading to the pacification of suffering, for him this is a safe refuge. For him this is the best refuge. Having gone to such a refuge, one is released from all suffering. Then, one on the Buddha. That enlightened one, whose sphere is endless, whose victory is irreversible, and after whose victory no defilements remain to be conquered. By what track will you lead him astray, the trackless one? That enlightened one in whom there is not that ensnaring, entangling craving to lead anywhere in conditioned existence, and whose sphere is endless. By what track will you lead him astray, the trackless one? And finally, what to me seem the most beautiful verses in the Dhammapada, and beautifully translated. Happy indeed we live, friendly amid the haters. Among men who hate, we dwell free from hate. Happy indeed we live, healthy amid the sick. Among men who are sick, we dwell free from sickness. Happy indeed we live, content amid the greedy. Among men who are greedy, we dwell free from greed. Happy indeed we live, we for whom there are no possessions. Feeders on rapture shall we be, like the gods of brilliant light. So a wonderful collection, beautifully translated, and really a must. Every one of us should have a copy and carry it with us everywhere we go. It's beautifully produced to the high standards of Windhorse Publications, with a very beautiful cover by Vincent Stokes. It's a companion volume to The Light of Asia, so it's in the same sort of style of production. I presume it's a sort of Classics of Buddhism series. On the cover of the book is a section from Odilon Redon's drawing of the Buddha from 1906. Just as on the cover of The Light of Asia, there's a modern painting of the Buddha. So these are sort of Western artistic expressions or interpretations of the Buddha. It's a hardback. It'll withstand heavy treatment. It'll go at the bottom of a rucksack. It'll fit neatly into a briefcase. It'll go in your pocket, like that. It'll go in a lady's handbag. You can just carry it like that, and it won't sort of weigh you down. It's going to be able to withstand heavy treatment, because you will be treating it heavily, because you'll be opening it so much over the years. Perhaps you'll be learning it by heart yourselves. And it's available today. It's being launched today at the very generous price of £9.99, and copies are available in the foyer immediately after this. Bante will be seated out there, and he'll be signing copies. I will quite understand if more of you want copies of this than my book. In fact, I would strongly recommend that if it's a choice, well, this is the one to buy. Just to show a little selflessness on this occasion. So, please don't miss this opportunity to both buy the book and get it signed. You will have it for your life. And perhaps, you'll have to come back and get new ones, because you'll be giving them to friends who you see just need this very, very pithy and beautifully translated, beautifully produced version of the Dhammapada. So in the foyer, after this session, £9.99, and get it signed.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.